This is Big Podcast.
Look, I don't like it either, but podcasting has some competition. It's confusing things. I'm going to talk about it. It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. If you want to grow your podcast, if you want people to care about your podcast, if you want to make money with your podcast, spread a message, make your mother proud, you are in the right place. My name is David Hooper. BigPodcast.com is the website. And every Friday morning, New York City time, I send out a newsletter. It is called Big Podcast Insider. This episode of Build a Big Podcast, the audio edition of that newsletter. This is issue number 191, and here's what I'm going to talk about. A good story. What a six-figure podcast looks like most of the time. YouTube versus audio podcasts. The number one podcast platform. AI-generated social media comments. Want more podcast downloads? Do this. Also, some classified ads, things that will help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, make a podcast that matters, the things that this podcast is about. This episode of Build a Big Podcast brought to you by Riverside.fm, a virtual studio that makes recording and editing at the highest quality possible, accessible to anyone. You're going to look and sound your best. That's because Riverside records you and your guests locally, bypassing poor or unstable internet connections and giving you studio quality audio and video. It's summertime. Maybe you got kids home. What are they doing? Using your internet, watching videos, playing games. It's hard to record a quality podcast when everybody's using your internet connection, but you're not going to have a problem at all using Riverside.fm. You're going to get studio quality audio and video wherever you and your guest are. Also, lightning fast editing. Editing, not the most fun thing in the world, but Riverside's got some tools to make it easier on you. Also, you want people to listen to your podcast, right? AI magic clips, that's what they call it. They're going to find the best parts of your podcast using AI. Chop them up, get them to you using your pre-made templates, put them out there on your social networks, bring people to your podcast. It's a great system from recording to editing to marketing your podcast. Check it out for free. You can do that. They're going to give you a couple of hours. Riverside.fm is the URL. Take a look, kick the tires, see how it works for you. If you want to stick around, I've got a discount code for you. Again, you start with a free account. You can get that at Riverside.fm. And if you want to stick around, the discount code to get you 15% off. It's Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. That's Riverside.fm, the discount code, Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. Every single thing that I talk about on this podcast, especially the insider editions, it has to do with podcasting. And because I'm going from thing to thing to thing, all of them to do with podcasting, you're going to hear this sound. That's how you know that I've switched. If you want more information, the links to the things I'm talking about, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. That's where you're going to find it. Does that break sound familiar to you? Generals gather in their masses, just like witches at black masses. Too bad I can't beatbox to get the drums going. Yeah, anyway. Sounds like Black Sabbath, but it's not. It's not. Don't sue me. All right, let's get to it. A good story. This is the headline. This caught my attention. Australian field hockey player opts to amputate part of his finger in order to compete in Paris Olympics. That's going on right now. If you want the full story, you can see it at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. That is dedication, is it not? Just chop it off. I don't want to miss the Olympics. This guy's been in a couple of Olympics already. He knows what he's getting into. It only happens every 4 years. Didn't want to take 6 months off for rehab. It's a great story. It gets people invested in him. You might want to watch him, or we're going to check out how he did. Hearing that story, seeing that story, front page of a lot of newspapers and websites, that shows you the kind of publicity that a good story can get. And this is why I bring this up. I think almost everybody has a good story like that. For some people, it's going to be obvious. Some people, not so obvious. And when I say a good story, at least for your audience, I'll give you an example. I've got some voiceover-related stories. These are linked, actually, at newsletter.bigpodcast.com, issue number 191. I put them in my cheat sheet when people are going to interview me, and these are voiceover related. So if you're talking to me on your podcast or other media outlet about podcasting, I've got stories that I can pull out. They each have a moral. They add credibility. They give me something interesting to talk about. When you go on a podcast or you're doing any kind of media, it is good for you to feed the information that you want out to these people that are doing the article, doing the interview, basically getting the word out for you. If you leave it up to them, they may not ask you or talk about what it is that you want. I see this all the time with the musicians that I interview. I've got a broadcast radio show. It's called Music Business Radio. I interview people all the time that have had 20, 30-year careers. A lot of times when they come to me, they're going to have a new album out. Dolly Parton was one of those people. She's got an album called Rockstar. It's duets. And we talked about that. She doesn't want to talk about Jolene. She doesn't want to talk about Porter Wagner. She wants to talk about the new album. And you've got something similar. I've got something similar. I've got old books that I wrote about the music business, which I don't really talk about anymore. Now, if you wanted to talk about them with me, yeah, I'd do it. But I really want to talk about podcasting, spreading a message, the things that I'm working on now. You need to think about that when you're doing interviews. In an interview cheat sheet, that is a good way to help that along. If you want to see the example, newsletter.bigpodcast.com, issue number 191. Feel free to take this interview cheat sheet. Obviously, you're going to want to change it up. You're not going to be telling the same stories. And they're not going to apply to you. Put your own stories in there, but it'll give you an idea of how to come up with those stories. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 191. Let's talk about Big Podcast AMP. If you like the newsletter, if you like this podcast, you're going to love Big Podcast AMP. It's the audio monetization program. It's a personal coaching program that's going to help you do three things. 1, grow your podcast audience. 2, get people talking about your podcast. Also 3, make more money with your podcast and also your podcasting talents. You think that podcasting is easy. Maybe it is easy for you. Not so much for other people. How do you sell that kind of skill to other people? I'm going to tell you how to do that in Big Podcast AMP, the audio monetization program. If you want more information about it, bigpodcast.com/AMP, bigpodcast.com/AMP. What a six-figure podcaster looks like most of the time. This is a dirty little secret about the music business, and it is very similar to something that most podcasters face. And it's not just music and podcasting. This is all throughout the entertainment industry. Most music acts today are making more money from live performances, merch, and licensing deals than actual music. But it's the music that enables everything else. Same for podcasters. You can make good money via sponsorships and advertising, things that are directly in your podcast. But most of the big earners, when I say big earners, I'm talking 6 figures and more, they've got other things going on. Digital products, courses, ebooks, templates. I just mentioned Big Podcast AMP, audio monetization program. I got into radio and later podcasting to market myself as a marketing person. First in the music business, later on in the entertainment industry. And we do that via audio, specifically broadcast radio and podcasting. So I started with the product and the service, and I got into podcasting. Sometimes you're going to start with a podcast and you think, how can I make this work? Add a digital product to it. Platform payouts, views, streams, YouTube ads. It's basically a licensing deal. You're licensing your content to YouTube. They're throwing an ad on it, and you make some money off of that. Can you make a lot of money? Yeah, some people do. Some people do. But for most people, it's not bad money, but it's not going to get you to 6 figures alone. Physical products, hats, merch, whatever. In-person coaching and consulting or online coaching and consulting. That's basically Big Podcast AMP, to use that example. Sometimes we get together in person, but most of the time it's going to be online. Things like Zoom calls, a message forum. This is easy to do if you're in a particular niche. If you're in the how-to business, you're teaching a certain type of skill. Not so much when you're in the entertainment business. For the most part in that business, you're paid for appearances. The Haktua girl, she's being paid by appearance right now. Last week, $15,000 per appearance. This week, maybe 10. I don't know. Right now, she's having her 15 minutes of fame. She's hot. Can she make it work into something else? Maybe. We've seen it with Lil Nas X. Balloon Boy, didn't work. Island Boys, didn't work. Octomom, didn't really work. And that's not an insult. Sometimes you're hot, sometimes you're not. There have been times when I've been selling books like gangbusters, man. And other times, people just aren't that interested. The musicians that I talk about Dolly Parton, for example. She's having a good run right now. Everybody wants a piece of Dolly. Duncan Hines cake mix. She's got an iron skillet company that is doing a Dolly Parton iron skillet. She's all over award shows. She is having her moment. But there have been times when people were not interested in her. And I'm not saying that she didn't have fans, but all of us, no matter how big or how small, have these good times and we have these bad times or lesser good times if we stick it out enough. But this is how people are making 6 figures. 1, they keep showing up, but they do things other than what they're doing as far as media. Digital products, platform payouts, physical products, in-person and online coaching and consulting. It is nice to have options as a podcaster, and you have plenty. It is fairly easy for most podcasts to put a business around that podcast, even if it's just merch. If you want to see all your options, I've got them linked there at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 191. And if you really want to go deep into it, I've talked about it already. Big Podcast AMP, the audio monetization program. This is all I've done for 25 years, not just with podcasters, but with the musicians that I've worked with. I knew a band, they sold $1 million worth of t-shirts. Is that not insane? You wouldn't know them. They had one kind of 120 minutes hit on MTV. But in the Southeast, they were huge, playing all sorts of gigs, making money on the gigs, but making the real money on merch. I'll tell you one more story. This is a band that you will know. Alabama. Remember Alabama? Big in the 80s. These guys were getting $100,000 to play. And they're playing these big places. $100,000. That's not bad money. But they were selling $400,000 worth of merch per night. That's the kind of money that we're talking about when you can get your side business going. And it becomes not a side business. It's the real business. Insane Clown Posse, same deal. Name an Insane Clown Posse song. You don't know it. Not unless you're a fan. It's a merch business. The Ramones, CBGB's, not a band, but a club. Danzig, it is a merch business. Think about that. If you need help, reach out to me. But this information, what a six-figure podcaster looks like most of the time, newsletter.bigpodcast.com, issue number 191. YouTube versus audio podcast. If you're thinking about shifting your focus to YouTube, maybe you're already focusing on YouTube. I've got an important article for you. Shrikant Joshi, it's a buddy of mine from India. He's an Indian radio legend. He's a shock jock in India. Pune, India. They've got 9 cities in India that are as big as New York City. A lot of people. And he wrote an article for Big Podcast Extra. It is linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com, where he says this: YouTube is for reach, RSS, which is how we distribute our podcast, audio podcast. That is for loyalty. It is very seductive for podcasters to switch to YouTube and see a bigger set of numbers. But do not make the mistake of thinking that a view on YouTube that counts as 1 or 1,000 views, the 1000, seeing that is the same as 1,000 people listening to your audio podcast. It is not. YouTube has 1,000 distractions that interrupt a viewing experience. Ads like pre-roll, mid-roll, banner ads, that's disrupted. Recommended videos, thumbnails and titles of suggested videos that pull a viewer away from your content, keeping them on YouTube onto somebody else's content. And sometimes that's going to work for you. Sometimes you hit the algorithm, boom, everybody comes to your stuff. But are they coming to your podcast? Are they coming to the merch and the other things that you've got in order? Not necessarily. What about the comments section? Again, this is something that can work for you. It is nice when people start talking about what it is that we are putting out. Not just to us with the feedback that we get, but talking to each other. But scrolling through comments distracts you from video content. Notifications, what about that? Hit that bell. Alerts for new videos. That interrupts the viewer focus. Plus, let's give it up for all these YouTubers that are such great marketers. These eye-catching thumbnails, sensational titles in the sidebar. That's keeping people away from your content. So yes, you're getting more views. That's because you're taking people away from other people's content. But is it going to be long-lasting? Is there going to be loyalty there? Are people going to buy your stuff, use your services? Not compared to an audio podcast. I've got more thoughts on this. Actually, Shrikant has more thoughts on this. It's a great article. I've got it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 191. The number one podcast platform. You know what it is? It's YouTube. Let's continue that discussion. I hate to admit this, but when it comes to reach, it's what I just said, that people are listening to podcasts on YouTube. It's the number one platform for 31% of podcast listeners in the US. Spotify is 21%, by the way. Apple has 12%. As I mentioned, there are trade-offs when you use YouTube over an audio-first platform. But the upside of YouTube is there are a ton of people there, and they may be the right people for your podcast. I'm not saying that you should not go on YouTube, that you should not put your stuff there. You should put your stuff there. I think you need an audio-first element, though. YouTube is a lot of podcast newcomers, but here's what happens with these podcast newcomers once they become a guy like me, listening more than 4 years, maybe a person like you as well. They're switching to audio only, or they've got YouTube playing in the background. Keep this in mind. Video sometimes is too exposing. Audio first, theater of the mind. You don't know where I'm coming from. Well, I've told you. I'm coming from a 5x8 closet. Does it look cool? Yeah, it looks cool. But it's still a closet. Not nearly as interesting as me just talking, in my opinion. It arguably could take away from some of the content. One, because I've got so many mistakes, herky-jerky jump cuts. That's distracting to people. You don't see the edits or even hear the edits on an audio-first podcast. It's easy to make yourself sound better than you are. And that's less distracting. And that's more engaging. And that's more authoritative. So that's another reason for an audio-only podcast. Still, putting it up on YouTube, yeah, that can help. Maybe you do audio only. A video element helps if you're going to do YouTube, but YouTube is a completely different animal. Everybody thinks, oh, I'll just do a YouTube video, then I'll turn it into an audio podcast. Or I'll do an audio-only podcast, put it up on YouTube. No, man. Two separate things. What I like to do with YouTube is use it for promo clips. I talked about Riverside.fm. It's easy when you're on a session. Run the video, do some promo clips, use their tools, put it out on YouTube, and then try to bring people over to your audio-only podcast. That's how I suggest using it. You don't have to put a lot of time into the editing. You don't have to put a lot of time into the studio. It is a quick one-take thing. You've got a YouTube presence, but you bring people over to your table where you are playing your game. Anyway, a lot of facts about YouTube. One is the audience has more males and is younger than the Apple Podcast audience. That's why you see the manosphere on YouTube, not necessarily on Apple Podcast. Because YouTube is considered an entertainment search engine and it gives similar content recommendations, it's the dominant podcast discovery platform. Yeah, for a platform. But if you've got a good podcast that you're bringing a community into, word of mouth is going to be much better than YouTube for you. You got to work it. It's not automated, but that's assuming you can get in with YouTube in the beginning. Everybody acts like, oh, YouTube, yeah, they're going to promote me. Not necessarily. There are plenty of YouTube videos, 5, 10 views. You may be one of them. Those who discover a podcast on YouTube say they stick with the platform for video, comments, community, entertainment, recommendations, and platform features. They might not even know how to get a podcast. You got to educate them on that. You don't want somebody on YouTube listening to your stuff. I mean, yeah, you do, but it would be better for you to have a direct line to that person via RSS where you don't have to worry about the algorithm. That way the person is guaranteed to get your stuff. Because on YouTube, if you follow or subscribe or whatever they're calling it now, somebody could release a new video. You might not even get it. It's not like an RSS subscription. Not all genres work for video podcasts. Consumers who prefer to watch are more likely to like news, current events, and sports podcasts. That's because that stuff is visual. Among those who prefer to listen, true crime is the leading podcast genre. Why is that? It's because you're telling stories, man. It's what I mentioned about theater of the mind. People are getting into their heads. What could have happened? They're visualizing these scenes that may or may not exist. Bring that into your audio-only podcast. People say the book is better than the movie. That's what that is. The vast majority of the Apple and Spotify platform audience uses a smartphone. 38% of YouTube's podcast audience uses laptops and TV. I'm not saying that's bad. You need to account for it. A lot more stats, a lot more commentary on this in the full article. I've got it at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 191. AI-generated social media comments. Speaking of YouTube, if you are using the comments section of YouTube and you want more engagement to the comments that you make or that the replies to the comments that people leave on your stuff, this is a piece of software called Ollie. It makes it easier to reply to comments and start threads that get people to reply to you. It's not only for YouTube, it's for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, TikTok. It's $9. I've used it. It's pretty cool. It will give you a starting point. You're going to want to edit it just like any other AI tool. But for $9, not bad. It's going to get you to think about how you interact with people, and it's going to get you thinking about how you can get them to interact with you. It's $9. If you want to check it out, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 191. You want more podcast downloads? Do this. The majority of podcasts are listened to alone. But it's also true that a number of the most popular podcasts are that way because people love to discuss them with others. I've already talked about the YouTube comments. Forget video versus audio. A lot of people are there because they just want to comment. They just want to be heard. Everybody feels like they've got a voice on YouTube. How can you encourage listener interaction? I've written a full article about this. I have it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 191. 8 ways for you to encourage listener interaction. Let me know what you think about these. One of them is having live events. Are you interested in doing that with your podcast? Let me know. I'll talk more about it. I've done about 1,500 live events over the years. Music, comedy, book promotions, speaking engagements, parties. You name it, I've done it. So I know a lot about getting people 2 live events. What it takes. Is it easy? If you do it long enough, you're going to have those times where you're just like printing money. But it's also like gambling in a lot of ways, because there's going to be times when you lose money. If you're wondering why these podcast conferences are so much money, it's because it takes a lot of money to put one of these podcasting conferences on. 8 ways for you to encourage listener interaction with your podcast. I've got the article linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 191. Classified ads for you, things that will help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, and make a better podcast. Podpage. You need a website. Podpage is a great way to do it. 25,000 podcasters have used it to automatically create a beautiful, listener-friendly podcast site from an RSS feed. You plug your RSS feed into Podpage, boom. You've got an instant and customizable podcast website. Seriously, 20, 30 minutes, a few tweaks to it. You're good to go. You can have your website up tonight. I want you to try it for free. I've got a special link for you at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. What about episode notes for your website? Yeah, you need them. 35,000 podcasters use Cast Magic to automate episode notes. Also highlight clips, podcast summaries, blog posts, social media posts, newsletters. You upload your podcast audio to Cast Magic and it does the rest. It is very cool. You got a long podcast, 2-3 hours, boom. Handled. 10 minutes, boom. Handled. It is a very cool tool. That's why so many podcasters use it. There are a lot of tools like this, but Cast Magic is the one that people talk about. I've got a free trial for you. You can check it out. See how you like it. Upload your audio. You're going to be amazed. These new AI modules, woo, incredible. Some people are worried about AI not looking natural. Well, you give it an example of your writing. Say, write it like this. And it does. You'll think you wrote it. You can check it out for free, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Hey, when you're ready, here's how I can help you. I talked about Big Podcast Extra. That is a free email that I send out. I got a lot of stuff to say about podcasting, and it doesn't all fit in this podcast. It doesn't all fit in the weekly newsletter. That's why I made Big Podcast Extra. These are short emails to help you build an audience, attract clients, and make money via podcasting. Also, I've got a Podcast Growth Toolkit for you. It's a Swiss Army knife of podcasting, contracts, templates, things that you need to think about when you're doing your podcast to protect yourself so you don't run into trouble later on. I've got all this linked at bigpodcast.com. While you are there, make sure you check out Big Podcast Amp. I've talked about it, the audio monetization program. If you have podcasting skills that you want to make money with, let's talk about how to do that. Personalized coaching for indie podcasters to help you grow your podcast audience, build your authority, your brand, your reputation, and make money with your podcasting skills. It is cheaper than you think. You'll be working with me one-on-one. You'll be working with other Big Podcast Amp members. It is a very smart group of people, a very encouraging group of people. You're going to like it. You can check it out at bigpodcast.com/amp. While you're on the site, do make sure you subscribe to the podcast. I'm here every week, sometimes more than once a week. And I'm talking about growing your podcast, getting more people to your podcast, having a better podcast, making a podcast that makes your mother proud. Imagine how great that's going to be to get together with your mother for the holidays. You say, Mom, I got a podcast. Check it out. And she'll say, oh, I'm going to go to the hair salon and tell my friends about it. How good is that going to feel? Pretty good. But it's not going to happen unless you subscribe. So go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Do subscribe. I've got 3 buttons for you. One for RSS, one for iPhone, one for Android. Pick the one that you want. I'll deliver this podcast to you each and every time it comes out. No algorithms. Straight to your smartphone. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Go there right now before you forget. Make it happen. I'll see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.